It looks like a throwdown.
Has Mike ever looked?
They just use our support to moderate. Dan and Mike, they don't want to moderate. What?
No, we were just talking about it. Everybody remember this on Friday. Be there, or be square. It starts at noon? 12:30? Starts at 12:30. Okay. That's gonna be amazing.
Like, that is the greatest picture.
Isn't that fantastic?
The glasses and the hat is.
Isn't that wonderful?
Cosplaying being a dean, basically. That's when that was taken.
Yeah.
This picture of you too, Dan, but not wearing a hat.
If you notice behind me, it's a beer list.
Right, it is.
A natural element. Yeah.
The BJs.
You there.
Okay,
BJ's, yeah.
shall we start? Ready?
I think we're ready, Gustavo. Please.
Okay. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ivan Lopez Cruz. So Ivan was a grad student here at IU, and now he's at Sabancı University in Istanbul, Turkey. And today he's going to be talking about criminal recruiting. It's victimization or recruitment, not part of the title. The effect on the Mexican war on drugs and education. I guess that's the, but I cannot fully.
Yeah, you get it.
So Ivan is an expert on economics of crime. So I think it's going to be a very, very interesting presentation.
Oh, it's going to be fantastic. Okay. Evan, first of all, can we just ask, is your family, is everybody okay with the earthquake?
Yes, nothing happened there. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking. Indeed.
This looks okay from your side. This is great. I can help. Can you proceed, or can I?
No, I will proceed. I will.
Look at us. Well done. Okay.
Problem. Okay. So thank you all for being here, for having me. Let me express my gratitude to the workshop, right, for all the support that I have received throughout the years, and especially to Gustavo Torrens for the invitation. And well, today I will be talking about this project. So let me begin by expressing which is the most important objective of the project, all in all, right? So what occurred in Mexico is that there was a war on drugs that began in 2007. It is still ongoing, actually, right? It began in 2007, and violence spread across the country quite rapidly. It ended up engulfing basically the whole northern part of the country and also the Pacific very, very rapidly after the outbreak of the war. And all this violence may have affected or not educational outcomes, especially dropouts in high school, via two different channels. And it is important to distinguish these two channels in order to quantify them and also to measure their relative importance as well. So which are these two channels? First, we have victimization, are the direct costs of violence, where this happens, where these events occur. Of course, you may have not only victimization, but also the destruction of infrastructure and related affairs. So that's what occurs there. But you also have another channel that operates through an opportunity cost story, right? So how this works? Well, since there was so much violence, so many confrontations and clashes between DTOs, this may have increased the demand for foot soldiers, right? For sicarios, for people in the criminal sector in Mexico. So this may have created job opportunities for young kids, for people in high school age, and this may have exerted a detrimental effect in educational outcomes via this channel as well, right? So we have to distinguish between these two. So we aim at quantifying and measuring these two possibilities. So just to give you a sense of what happened right after the beginning of the war, you can observe here we have homicide rates across time. And as you can see, there was some sort of a declining trend, and the Mexican figures were just about to converge to the American ones as well in the year 2007. And then we have this explosion in violence right after the beginning of the war, okay? So this can be envisioned to some extent as the positive shock on demand for soldiers and for the sicarios from the cartels, of course. So why the project is important? So I would say that, first of all, as I said, quantification matters. If violence is having some effects in those places where it occurs, well, that's one thing. You can collect information as to how educational outcomes got affected there. But it could also be true that recruitment, right? Recruitment of new soldiers from the pool of young students, that can be occurring elsewhere in areas that are not necessarily encompassed by the combat zone, right? So it could be happening in some other places. So if you just gloss over this additional channel, you would be underestimating the effects of the war on drugs on education. So that's an important thing. And also because in quality, they are also different, right? They have a difference because it is not the same that you stop your educational process because you want to relocate somewhere else in the pursuit of a more safety place in which you can resume your education later on. That is essentially different to a story in which you basically join a cartel and then you start acquiring criminal capital. Then it is much harder to resume a legal life, so to speak, right? So this is also very important. It differs in quality. So it is essentially important to distinguish these two mechanisms. So let me give you some historical context as to how the war came about. So the thing is that in 2006, the president, Felipe Calderón, decided to launch a war on drugs based on the contention that a huge portion of municipalities were under the control of criminal organizations. This control was sort of a peaceful control because there was not much violence, as I showed you before. But somehow, yes, we have to regain official control over these territories. And to do so, we are going to implement a war on drugs via two public programs. The first of which was the Subsemun, that consisted basically on the dispersion of federal resources across municipalities to reinforce local police forces. And the second one consisted in the joint interventions that came down basically to military campaigns aimed at beheading criminal organizations. So this propagated violence via two different mechanisms. One of which is that if you behead a criminal organization, then there is some sort of a civil war that you trigger within the cartel, because now you have to find out a way to replace the boss, right? To replace the capo. And secondly, if you distort the relative power across across cartels, then some contestants may smell blood and then basically intensify their attacks in order to conquer new available spots, right, in the territory and new strategic spots. So those are the two mechanisms that were at play here. Now, there is also, a political component in this story that is mostly related to the change in the political landscape that came about in the year 2000 in Mexico. And it began actually before that, since the early 90s. So the thing is that before the year 2000, schematically speaking, you have the PRI that exerted some sort of monolithical control over the country. There was not much democracy going on. And then this enabled the president to weave agreements between cartels. And basically by guaranteeing territorial integrity, the president prevented, the government all in all, prevented cartels from clashing with one another. You have democracy, right? And the president is impeded from doing this because now the federal administration doesn't have the same sort of control across space. And then, well, cartels found themselves all of a sudden in the need of recruiting private armies to defend their territories and also to seize the opportunity to conquer new territories as well. So then you have these clashes between the Pacific and Gulf cartels occurring after this. So in the words of De Hoyos in 2016, based on journalistic evidence, he says that the combination of these two factors was kind of the perfect storm that basically triggered violence so dramatically across space after 2007. So he says the Mexican war on drugs induced the cartels towards greater levels of professionalization, including the outsourcing of specialized criminal services to street gangs, drug transportation and sale, kidnapping, extortion, and murder. So all these activities, criminal activities, may be envisioned as positive shocks to the demand for cheap labor from the cartels, right? And then this may have exacerbated their aim at recruiting new members. So in order to quantify these two channels at play during the Mexican war on drugs, we employed this equation. This is just an econometric model with a panel regression in which we follow municipalities and we measure their socioeconomic markers, for instance, education, previous education, the population composition, things like that. We also employ a measure of exposure to violence, which relates to homicides. So then homicide rates are basically, in this case, a proxy of how much violence is occurring in a municipality. And then, well, that is also a proxy as to how much victimization is happening there as well, right? And then we have a measure of recruitment. So this one is basically the key feature here, the one that we are focusing on. So here in this regression, I missed another term that basically reflects the difference in difference structure in the model, but it's still there. I mean, it is embedded in this structure. So let me tell you how we measure recruitment very briefly. What we did was to resort to information on detentions, right? And basically what we did was to measure the exports of criminals across different territories in the country. So we computed this statistic, exports of related to crime C coming out from municipality M at time T, right? So suppose that you have a criminal with residence in municipality M1 committing a crime in municipality M2, right? Where the violent event occurred. So what happens here is that you can distinguish behind this detention event the recruitment story that happened in M1 separately from the victimization story that ended up happening in M2, right? That's the way in which we track down this measure of recruitment. Now, it could be also the case that you have instances in which a local criminal ends up committing a crime in M1. So in this particular situation, you cannot disentangle between the two sides of the story, the victimization and the recruitment effect. So that's why it is so important for us to focus on external recruitment, on this other measure. So from a causality perspective, the most important challenge that we need to surmount boils down to this diagram, right? So what happens is that if a municipality is under dispute for some reason, then the local cartel may be in the need of recruiting new members in order to retaliate against this invasion, so to speak. But he may decide to, the cartel may decide where to collect these new recruits in places where the dropout rates are low, in places where they are already high, right? So definitely it's going to be more successful if it goes to impoverished areas and try to basically recruit new members from those locations. So that is bad for us, because then it is education which is explaining recruitment and not the other way around, right? So we would like to do something here in order to distinguish the causal effect of the variable at hand. So how to do that? Basically, we detected all those municipalities that were systematic exporters of a variety of crimes related to drug trafficking, right, before the war. And then we hypothesized that in those municipalities, for some reason, there are some networks that enable criminal organizations to recruit more efficaciously new members, okay? But those are unobserved. And then we mapped these municipalities onto the rest of the Mexican territory in order to construct a control group, right? So here, say that you have high dropout rates in the red municipality and also in the blue one, right? But the treated group is only the red one. So then basically after the explosion of violence, only one of them, the red one in this case, is going to exhibit a causal effect of recruitment on education. So that's kind of the idea that we followed here. So let me tell you a few things about the conclusion so far. We have detected that both channels are sizable. They are important, economically speaking. They are important because they raised dropout rates in high school by 5 percentage points. So that is significant indeed, especially in a country like Mexico. And also, what else we have distinguished? Well, that these recruitment effects have not have a true effect on students that are in primary school, for instance, and they don't have much of an effect on female students as well. So that also basically reinforces our message. And we have discussed some policy implications so far. So this is probably the weakest part and the part in which we need the most help, because what we are thinking is basically maybe the war on drugs was something that needed to happen because the cartels were already engulfing too many areas in the country, and that is not good, right? So something needs to be done. But now, if you are about to initiate a war on drugs, what can you do in order to be more successful, right? Probably you have to implement some sort of a social program ahead of time in order to basically break down these networks that support cartels at a very local level and enable them to recruit new members so easily. Something like that, right? But basically designing the optimal policy in the realm of all this mess is not necessarily easy, right? Or a simple task. So we need comments on that. Also, there is another methodological problem that basically boils down to the thing that the war didn't begin exactly at the same time across all municipalities. And so far we have treated it as if it did, right? As if it happened exactly in 2007 for everyone. This is not true. So we are reconstructing our data set, basically focusing on the dyads, on the cartel dyads, and following their clashes across time, so as to see when are the key moments in which we should be observing more recruitment at a local level. That's what we are working with right now. So I think that yeah, that's all I have to say. Well, now let's open up this questions and discussion section.
Okay, so I think the queue is open, so you'll be following the
Really quick and easy one. First off, that was fantastic. Very well done. Thank you. You used, I think the data stopped in 2012 that you showed, just the homicide rates?
Yeah,
and just for the last 10 years, is it your impression that that's continued more or less at that level, or has it?
It has increased.
It increased.
There is a second wave of violence that remains unexplained by the way.
Yeah.
Still requires more discussion. Yes, indeed, this has continued.
Yeah. Okay. No, thanks.
Yes, you are next, I think.
Okay. Really good job in
Online.
staying and bravo to try to unpack these two different pathways. It does seem that if you are treating all municipalities as starting in 2007, you have results. I would guess. I would expect that once you're able to control for when the war on drugs actually starts in each municipality, to probably get more.
It will be more precise. Right now, it's like a crude average of what happened. The limitation.
Yeah. So I bet you'll find stronger results. Can you go to the slide where you try to handle the endogeneity problem? High school.
I wouldn't have just missed that.
What happened here? It's no, I can do it.
I think he's on Zoom too, so he can.
Yeah, I can do it. Yeah.
You can do it from your side. Okay. Really sorry.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, can we go back a
What
couple of slides to the one where you sort of try to say how you're handling the this one. Yes, this will do. Actually, it's the next one. And so it's about, so you want to say that you don't have to worry about low education rates driving recruitment. because you expect that that essentially that it's essentially it's a sort of a network effect, that essentially the existence of those networks.
Oh yeah, that's right. So what we are hypothesizing here is that there are some networks operating here in this red municipality that are not present in the blue one. But other than that, these municipalities are basically replica of one another. So a cartel would be indifferent from recruiting in one or the other. And the one reason for which you would observe a higher effect of recruitment on the red one is because of the presence of these hidden.
But you can't observe them in any way.
No, I mean, you just can infer where they are based on the export rate prior to our export rate of criminals occurring in these municipalities. That's the way you do it.
Can you just further unpack, or maybe it's just repeating what you said, why that helps us with the indigeneity problem?
Well, it helps you very much because what we were saying is that probably recruitment occurs because cartels may be looking up for impoverished areas where it is easier for them to recruit new people, right? But what we are saying now in this realm is that basically we are looking at a set of municipalities that exhibit the same levels of development, right? The same levels of dropout rates. They are basically a flat, featureless piece of land. And the only reason for which the cartels may be recruiting in a portion of this featureless land is because the existence of these networks that we don't observe, but we inferred via the exports of criminals before the war. Okay. You see what I mean?
And the exports of criminals before the war, they're all violent criminals. They're all the kinds of violence you're talking about.
Yeah. These crimes are basically related to drug trafficking organization activities, DTO's activities, such as extortion and drug trafficking, carrying prohibited weapons, the exclusive use of the army, things like that.
Okay, because I would also expect those things to be happening in, I guess my only question is there some other latent variable that might help us understand that we would also reasonably expect to be driving that in high dropout rates as well, right? So, and that we just can't observe, right? There's somehow lower perceived opportunity, even though, right? Maybe economic diversification in each of these territories might be different, and so you might have higher rates of this going from one to the other.
All that is observable. So all those things we can observe, so they can enter in the mix. And then basically we're relying here on the conditional independence assumption, right? Based on observables, right? We say that the effect is neatly observed in this subset of the data because of the conditional independence assumption based on observables. Yeah, I mean, if you can think about a variable that escapes our data set and that can still explain at the same time simultaneously recruitment and violence or education, then that would be problematic.
Well, and I mean, but it would also need to explain export rates of criminals.
Yeah. I mean, it must have some degree of correlation with everything so as to play havoc with our results.
I'll come back to him.
You'll come back.
Yeah.
Mike and then Dan.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this was a really interesting paper and talk, and I'm not going to try to figure out your technical sort of thing, but give you some sort of background here. When I started in the 80s, I was doing conflict studies in science, and economics wasn't really studying coercion as economic activity or a collective choice activity or an organizational activity. And the data opportunities were like lousy. And you know, Jessica and others are doing better in sort of generating data and doing analysis within different sort of traditions. But I really am impressed with the sophistication you're able to bring to understanding the role of drug running organizations as fundamental part of the political economy, unfortunately, in Mexico and in other countries. And in other countries, an important part of the political economy is taken up by rebel groups of some kinds who may be, you know, stealing oil or extracting diamonds. So they're funded or doing kidnapping. So there's all kinds of business that rebel groups can sort of get, criminal groups can get into. So I think I really encourage you to continue this because I'm just impressed with the level of sophistication in this literature. But I want to press you a little bit on this notion of focusing on the indirect effects that come from sort of a drug running organization that's operating in one region of the country, going and recruiting potential soldiers or potential members of their organization in other regions and bring them into the regions. And you're trying to sort out what regions do they target for their activities and stuff like that. Very sort of interesting. But it seems to me there are other, I mean, and it's, I guess this comes from being around the workshop too long. I mean, in a sense, you're treating the men of this age group as a common pool from which the drug runners can extract information. The local economy can extract some of these individuals, you know. And I'm trying to figure out what would be some other potential extractors from that common pool of resources and whether you get to a point where there's nobody in that age group left sort of in that region, and if you get close to that sort of level. And I think there are two potential extractors that I'm curious how you would integrate them into your analysis. First, the military is going to be extracting people from the same age, right? So you haven't talked about how much recruitment's going on of the military and whether they're really sort of doing it. And you're also not talking about deaths that are resolving more directly. I know you're going to indirect effects, but I think there's a direct effect sort of in here. Because there's sort of two other ways that people can be dying in the regions, either the one they're operating in or extracting from. The police, or they could be in military operations and people could die. And they're mostly, I know a lot of civilians die in these things too, but there's a lot of potential for individuals of that age group dying not in inter-squad conflicts between different cartels, but when they're fighting the police, or they can be arrested and put in jail. That's another way to extract potential employees from this organization out of the market, is to put them in jail. And so it'd be useful to sort of have a scale of how much is the military effectively killing drug runners or putting them in jail, because that also restricts the supply of people in this organization. And there's still another group that you haven't talked about, and that's the users. I mean, they're extracting these, they're recruiting people to work in their organization, but they have to recruit people to use their product. Okay, and the ones that are using their product may or may not be directly involved in the military operations. Okay? And some of those users are going to die. Okay, all right, and sometimes a fair number of them are going to die, and they're coming out of that same age group. They're going to be mostly the young men of that age group, I would think. I mean, I'd have to look at the data on that, but it'd be my presumption most of the people dying from drug use are young males. So how do you sort of put what you're doing in this broader context of the other potential extraction of this limited labor group and how much it hurts the economies in local economies in Mexico, and how effective how it affects the way the military can sort of operate? And then just how many deaths are occurring from this. So how do you sort of place that in that broader sort of context? Well, I know it's a big question, but
there's an easy way to do this.
There is.
It's basically by, as I was saying, by looking specifically at the clashes between cartels, and then you can basically associate all the homicides related to that.
Right.
And once you do that, you have a residual part, which basically would capture everything you have been saying. But that residual part is rather small. It's rather small. I mean, it could be significant. It could be exerting some significant effects across distinct regions in Mexico. That's for sure. And it would be very good to investigate which effects are these. But at a more global level, I'd say that those are not quantitatively that important. There is also another discussion, which is you touch upon at the beginning of your question, which is that there is some degree of diversification. So cartels are not devoting all of their energy anymore just to drugs. Right. They are encompassing other activities. And Gustavo and I just recently published a paper on that that basically focuses on oil theft. And we observed that indeed these alternative activities, when you measure them, then they indeed reveal a different panorama. So what you observe there is that deaths associated to oil theft are sizable and by all means comparable to those related to drug trafficking. So that is an important thing. But still, from the perspective of the data, what you would be observing is clashes between the same organizations, but with different purposes. One purpose would be to conquer places where there are roads leading to the U.S. border. And so that would be related specifically to
prime locations,
to drug trafficking. But you observe that along the pipelines that carry oil throughout the country, you observe also agglomeration of conflict there. And that has different consequences, of course. For instance, if you think carefully about it, if you want to extract oil from these pipelines, you need to be some sort of more stationary. So you have to be there, right? Construct these networks there and so on. And that has detrimental, even further detrimental effects on socioeconomic outcomes at the regional level, because these guys are operating there. They need to weave agreements with the communities. Then the communities starts defending them because they provide jobs, job opportunities. So of course that is a major problem. That's one of the reasons for which we limited the time frame for this particular study to 2012, because all these other events unfolded later on at a future date. So I think that was a decision we made in that regard. But you're definitely right in being concerned about alternative effects propagated differently across the Mexican territory, later dates mostly, I think. Yeah.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Because I'm still thinking of the people who are dying from this market operation. Okay. And those deaths are not going to be in the homicide data, right? And they're going to be drug deaths.
They're going to be?
Drug deaths. People are dying from overdoses.
Well, that is not a major problem.
So I see, and as you were talking, I sort of thought my way through there. I was thinking, well, that means that they're effective managers of their business operation by making sure their users don't die off from. They don't use it too much and go into overdoses. But then I sort of realized most of their users are in the United States.
Yes.
So most of the deaths that are occurring are not in the potential pools that you're drawing from. So there's a separation between where they're extracting employees and where they're extracting users. And they don't really care. There's plenty of people in the United States who are going to use these drugs.
Exactly.
Get them in, and they're very adept at that. So they don't really have to worry about losing potential customers, but they are in critical danger of losing competitive position to other cartels and to the police sort of thing. So that's why I was sort of missing, is that their market for this economic sector is really an export market to the United States.
It's an export market, definitely. That's right.
Just one comment that could be interesting is like also the age recruiting range for the military for these organizations might be different. Because this is dropouts at college level, it's like lower. And then I think to go to the military, at least you need to be, 18 years old, I don't know. So maybe there is no.
A question about this plane.
We're bypassing both of us. Okay, go.
No, if it's a point.
It was more just about whether there's a theory of recruitment here. Essentially, right? Because the dropout suggests it's an opportunity cost theory, right? But I would also argue that, like, you could, well, this is an empirical question. I would imagine that cartels are also using violence directly. It's not an opportunity cost. It's not that, you know, we pay better than the job that you could get or what you'd be doing if you were in high school, but also if you don't work for us, we will. So I'm curious, is that part of the homicide numbers, or is that, I mean, especially because then that speaks to this whole, like, well, if they are part of the same group, same age group, does the military have to pay more, or the police have to pay more? The police can't really threaten if they want to recruit, but the cartels can.
Yeah, it's an important question, definitely. I don't know. Well, I have heard stories about forced recruitment, as you were mentioning. In the main, I think this is kind of difficult for the cartels because it's never a good thing to have slaves in an army, right? Because they can operate against you. It's not a very good thing to have them, right? Knowing your secrets and your positions and all that. Because in the end, if it is not an opportunity cost story, then these guys are going to basically turn their backs on you, and that's, I guess, an important part of the story. This is a business, right? It's not a war, an open war between countries or between legal entities. This is a business for profit, and I think that profit, which is a significant part of the story, is basically what drives all these incentives to join cartels. But you're right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the numbers would be. In that sense, I don't have any sort of a statistic to tell you the exact percentage of people that voluntarily join the cartels rather than being forced into them.
You don't have any reason to believe that your homicide statistics include people that said no.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, sure.
I was just curious.
Sure.
Okay, I may be going out in left field with this, but I'm trying to understand what you're doing in a sort of larger context of underground economies among the urban poor, in which there's a larger literature. And if you're not familiar with it, I think you might get some ideas from it about how some of these interactions work out, even if not directly in the context of these international cartels, right? Even if it's just local gangs and so forth. So an old book now, when was it, 2006 or something, by a guy who described himself as sort of a rogue sociologist named Sudhir Aladi Venkatesh from University of Chicago. I think might be consider himself a rogue sociologist because he really acts more like economic anthropologist than a sociologist. He wrote a book called Off the Books: The Underground Economy of the Urban Poor, focusing on a neighborhood, Mackey Park, on the south side of Chicago, predominantly Black neighborhood, and how the neighborhood functions as sort of as an economic unit, but also with contested policies within that economic unit. And I'm wondering if a book like that, or I'm sure there are others out there, this is one that really struck me when I read it, would maybe disclose some other variables that you're not capturing at this point that might be significant.
Yeah. Okay. We'll check that literature then. Sure.
Mike.
Let me make another comment along the same lines Dan's saying about sort of looking at text. Where I'm kind of coming from, the work literature I'm more familiar with, I think maybe Jessica's coming from a similar perspective here. If you look at the literature on rebellions, in IR literature, political science literature, there's a lot of concern about child soldiers being recruited, okay? And it doesn't sound like that's a problem here. I think that's kind of where you were going, that the people are just being recruited and forced to come in and we'll shoot you. And that's really common in a lot of rebellions in Africa and in Asia, different parts of Asia. And probably in maybe Colombia would be a very different sort of situation where they have these rebel groups going. And I think another way to sort of put this in comparative context is sort of with the organized crime literature and the terrorism literature. And in both cases, their family ties are play a big role in recruitment processes. And to what extent is the recruitment by going outside into another region connected to whether that family or the families that are driving this this crime order? I know it's a business, but the concern you have there about people turning on the organization if they get out can be reduced by drawing someone you're related to, and you know who their relatives are and stuff like that. So, what extent does family ties connect into how these businesses are organized?
Yeah, indeed, what has been known about the war on drugs in Mexico is that these family ties were crucial before the war.
Okay.
Before the war, because everything was limited to a narrower scope of people, especially in the north. But then after the outbreak of the war, since it was so violent, most of these people died in the first years. So then new recruits were in order, and therefore here the family ties began to be to play, I would say, a smaller role in explaining recruitment. So yes, I think it was very important at the beginning and not so important later on. It's also problematic for our specification because we are identifying recruitment places before the war, not after the war, right? So these places may have changed significantly over the years, and that's why this structure that will follow now, clashes between cartels over time, will be quite helpful in that regard, because it will allow us to identify better which new municipalities are under the control of what cartel at each and every period. So
just a quick point on that. Yeah, that's consistent with your discussion of these as being professionalized. They're becoming professional organizations and no longer family-based organizations.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Sure.
It seems like, is there historical data on it? I mean, like, right, you were talking about the PRI era and sort of the extent to which there was relative calm because there was pretty much an equilibrium that emerged as a result of the thing. It's fine. You guys are fine. We're just gonna let it go. Is there historical data on which families then were territorially bounded in that context? So you could use it as a really interesting not instrumental variable, but at least control for thinking about this question of where traditional pools of recruitment were, where they no longer exist. What that might mean for how you can, because then I also then think that, like, to Mike's point about the literature, you pointed out it's a business, and one difference between cartel dynamics and rebellion dynamics is that usually rebels want to govern. And to the extent to which cartels don't necessarily want to govern, they just want cheap compliance.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
Those might lead to different recruitment strategies and different fears.
Sure.
And so in other words, you could have a bigger contribution here about what a theory of recruitment, particularly in this and the cost of recruitment, look like when we're not talking about rebellions, when the fundamental underlying Olsonian stationary bandit context is slightly different, right? What does that imply? I think that could be could be really interesting. It also could tie into your earlier paper with thinking about whether recruitment looks different around oil regions, right? Because then you're looking at a Weinstein type monetary recruitment versus ideological, and those are very different.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I think that one can make a distinction quantitatively, but not otherwise, because you don't observe much more information about these recruitment events. But you can say, well, in these areas where oil is so important, well, recruitment is much higher, or it it increases alongside with oil prices or things like that. But I don't think that you can dig any deeper into this story as to one would like to write a model for that. I think, probably one Gustavo would be doing that. Right.
What are watching? I don't know.
Questions here. There's a bunch of, there are a couple of papers that show that like violence at the point of extraction is quite low, but on the outskirts of it is very high.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right? Because you essentially want to protect.
Sure.
By protecting it, you're going to push violence just out to the outskirts and keep people away.
That's more or less what we found, right?
Yeah.
In the oil paper, like there was violence distributed in this differential way because of the reasons you just mentioned. Yeah, that's true. And so Gustavo has been doing now is constructing this measure of concentration of power of cartels locally wise and also dispersion of power. And the graphs that we have been analyzing so far reveal that this has changed significantly. So this goes back to your original question that saying that, okay, before the war, there was much concentration of power. Cartels were holding quite a strong stand in different regions, typically dangerous regions, probably, but they were there. And now fragmentation has occurred in these places, and probably that has changed significantly the way in which new recruits are incorporated into these organizations. And I think that my work with Gustavo is going to speak about that. Yeah.
Angie.
I'm curious, you're talking about a lot of numbers that would be available, but I'm wondering how you're dealing with Schrodinger's cat issue of people aren't dead or alive, they're just gone. Which is a massive issue, massive numbers. So how are you accounting for that if you don't know how to count tons of people that are just gone?
No, missing people. Yeah, there are statistics about that as well. It is massive. Look, it is more massive now than it was before, because at the beginning, things were like this. Cartels wanted to basically demonstrate that they were constructing their empires across the territory and then leaving people, beheaded people in the streets and things like that was a major thing back then. So therefore, if you see how many people has been found in the streets in the initial years of the war, that was quite high. Now it is not that high anymore because cartels now are not, especially because of the policy interventions, the government is not happy about seeing so much violence in different regions. And then the cartels know that if they surpass a certain threshold of violence, then the army will come and then they will distort the business. So I guess that they learned about this dynamic over time, and now they are concealing the bodies in many different ways. But I don't think that was much of a problem, and experts say that that was not much of a problem for this specific period, from 2007 up to 2012. But you're right; it's a big problem, and one would like to see at least if the spatial distribution of missing people and homicides is the same. If it is the same, then we don't have much of a problem. It is very different, then yeah, we would have to reconsider our strategy.
More questions? Do we have anybody in the chat? No, I don't.
No, you don't have.
No.
I have a
Go. I
question. Sorry,
I was
so
trying to go also the policy dimension too.
Yeah, the policy
You
dimension
start.
in the US, right? So
Yeah, Pandora box.
yeah, right. So the reason why the recruitment theory matters, right, is because you suggested that one intervention is essentially to disrupt the sort of potential networking capacity of the cartels in these regions, but that's actually, that seems incredibly costly. The opportunity cost strategy would just be raise income, right? Provide jobs and people will be fine and they're not going to be recruitable. Yeah. Right. The third option is to say the PRI got it right. So what is, so short of the moral consequences of arguing that we should just allow cartels partition and govern these areas in ways that we, like we see, for instance, even I was in India for a while and the Naxalites, there was these tacit bargains. We're like, this is an Naxalite territory. We will let them know when we are coming through. But otherwise, our way of maintaining a little bit of stability is to say, we're just not going to bother you. Right. And they don't have to make it explicit, and the DRI wasn't really democratic, so they didn't really have to deal with whether it was an explicit or implicit bargain, right? But the question is why couldn't PAN make an implicit bargain that looked very similar to what was already in place, given changes that you're witnessing? And given what you've suggested, it's not clear what is a less costly strategy. We're going back to a relatively low violence and therefore low high school dropout.
Yeah, I think that this has a flavor of political economy. I think we have to think very carefully about all these elements. And I don't have an answer. I don't know what would be the structure of the game before the war and after the war, and it's very difficult. I don't think that there's a final answer to that. Maybe Gustavo can say something about this structure.
Yeah, only one. I would like to add one thing so you don't not only need to say, I will not touch you. It's like you need to stop up. So you need to divide the territory. It's like I will be the final arbitrator here. And if one cartel enters in the territory of another one, I will be punishing you. So I think that was the reason they were so successful reducing violence. But at the same time, it's, it's like, so as part of what we are studying now with Ivan, is like, they start concentrating in those areas. And then maybe they become too powerful. No? So that's our new hypothesis of why they were attacked. In part is, it's like, okay, yes, it's peaceful, but now
so what is state capacity?
They're a challenge. Well, they're becoming the new Leviathan. So essentially, you are not the Leviathan anymore. So essentially, that's part of the issue. So they reach the level in which they can challenge some functions of the state, and then you stop playing that role, you get what you got. So essentially, I think it would be super interesting to keep talking with Shes about this theory of recruitment. I want to also go in policy implications because you wanted comments on that direction, but more on the kind of following the opportunity cost story, okay? So essentially, a teenager that will be recruited by the cartel or at risk of being recruited, so you have to think, what's the alternative legal activity of this teenager, no? That's the key thing. And then you start thinking about policies that will affect exactly that, okay? So essentially, some people say, well, it's like, I know, education, but what are you talking about? It's like, so college for that person maybe doesn't matter. No?
Yeah.
So essentially what it matters is like legal activities that are, for low skill workers, okay? And you have to see a reasonable path for, not a, you're not going to enrich doing this, but at least you're not going to be facing all the risk of entering into the drug cartels. Yeah. And by the way, connected with Dan's point, most likely in the context of Latin America, that is another activity within the underground economy. Yeah. It's a non-violent illegal activity, not another, legal activity, so essentially. Mm-hmm. So it could be something else. And then I know that we talk a lot about, to some extent, you can think about displacing crime to things that are not as badly as these ones, essentially, which sounds very politically incorrect, but essentially you're kind of pushing these guys to go to...
It's efficient.
Yeah, to some extent, yes.
It's
like conditional on all the constraints. Or another activity that is part of the underground economy. Yeah. But again, it's not as violent or as harmful. And I think in particular, Latin American economies, they are really bad, implicitly and explicitly taxing people in those activities. And that's one reason you end up with 40% of the labor force in the, in the underground economy, or 30%. That's kind of usual numbers in Latin America now.
So it's the worst combination because you have a large part of the labor force in the informal sector, but you also have mafias which operate also in the informal sector. So then it's like
yes,
setting them together exactly in the out of the scope of control of the government, right?
Yes, and a lot of micro restrictions to enter in those specific markets.
Yeah.
So again, and also a high school education that essentially is focusing the 19th century style will be teaching like, I don't know, to 20% of top income families, how to become whatever, it's like leaders. And then these kids are not getting anything in those. So dropouts are, you know, you are receiving an education that it's not reasonable given your real opportunities. No? So it's like, I have this discussion with some people in my hometown in Argentina. It's like, we need to teach these kids from poor places how to install air conditions. Because that's a profitable alternative activity to drug trafficking. No restrictions on, you know, being an Uber driver or taxi driver, something like that. Yeah. So like, maybe you need to, you know, have subsidized grades for, you know, buying a car and becoming a taxi driver or something like that. So those are the activities that compete with going to the cartels, essentially, the legal ones.
Maybe also increasing mobility, you know, like
increasing mobility.
Shifting people from these difficult places to other ones before they get recruited. I don't know.
But so it's like I could follow with the opportunity cost story, which is the core of the paper, and think policies in the direction of opportunity cost.
So one other thing to think about are the services provided by organized gangs within their local communities. Right, in communities that police stay out of, that get really no other city services. Gangs bring food to the needy and do all this kind of stuff. So to have a balanced perspective on the costs of gangs and the benefits of gangs is important. Also to understand the intra-community pressures that affect how gangs operate within the neighborhoods. Like Take Back Our Parks movement, where people got sick and tired of having, you know, not being able to take their kids to the local park because, you know, there are lots of gang activity going on in the parks all the time. So
that's right.
The flip side of that being whether there's prestige in being in a cartel or not, I don't know.
Yeah, no, there is
like right in the same way that you get some sort of respect from being
their status, right?
So that might be another. Can't combat that with air conditioning training, but something else you gotta think about. Like,
yeah. So Ivan, correct me if I'm wrong, so connected with Dan's point, but at least in the Colombian case, there were examples in which the cartels, the big ones that they were established in some places, they started providing some public goods, like even wiping out regular crime. So probably in Cali in the 80s, the parks were extremely safe because the cartels were also wiping out all the regular standard crime. So essentially, it's like they were playing, you know, they were becoming leviathans, essentially. Stationary bandits. Stationary bandits, yes, exactly.
There's a lot of literature.
Ivan, 1 minute to wrap up.
I didn't get one.
Oh, sorry. Did I miss? Yes.
I have some idea about policy implication. Your work is fascinating and makes me thinking about the drug war in Thailand for the last 20 years. In that time, the people and the politicians agree with that policy. But later, many people claim that it's a policy failure. My idea is I'm just curious that how the government or municipalities see or evaluate this policy outcome. This is the policy failure or not? And how different between the policy success and the policy failure in this case, and how they see and how they evaluate negative outcome. In this case, it's like you face with the tension between two policies. The one is a drug policy, right? Try to decrease the cartels or the drug selling, something. On the other hand, you face with the negative effect to the young generation in the educational policy.
Yeah.
So I think this tension might be great if you address the tension between the negative effect of the drug policy effect to the educational policy and how they see the outcome or how they evaluate this policy between two levels of the government. The level of national governance, how they see the success of this policy, and the municipality, how the local government see the outcome of this policy. I think might be some different issue how they see this kind of policy, because from my experience for the last 20 years, I heard many people see the different things in the same policy outcome. It's about a drug war in Thailand.
Yeah, no, yeah, very interesting. Yes, definitely.
Sorry, as sometimes it's hard to explain.
No, it's very good. It was
Yeah,
I think.
I would suggest that you can follow this discussion, but 30 seconds to wrap up, Ivan, and then maybe answer that question. Or...
Thank you. Your comments are very useful. Yeah, I learned a lot. So I think that all this will improve our work significantly. So thank you all.
So do we have our announcements for?
Well, except for Friday, be there or be square. Friday, right?
Announce
in here. Yeah, that's right. And but I just sent you a thing on